NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
So I'm going to go quickly, and I'm going to dwell only on a couple slides which come from the world of criminal justice. So because I know that you guys are particularly interested in how that stuff works. So I first of all want to say that there's a lot of marketing that goes into what was called big data, now is called AI. So these are marketing terms. You should when you hear AI, you should think what is really intended is something that is trying to engender trust and intimidation at the same time. So basically, they want you to think, oh, they're just following the data. It's objective truth. But what they're really doing is hiding behind math. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. What I want you to get away from, get from this talk is that actually AI are opinions embedded in math. Like they're really just opinions and agendas that are sort of covered with sort of this certificate of confusion, so that you don't ask any questions. So I'm trying to, my sort of life plan is to sort of convince people that they do have the right to ask questions and to push back against this notion that algorithms are perfect. They're not. So I'm going to do the opposite of hiding behind the math. I'm going to tell you exactly what I mean by a predictive algorithm. And I will, in fact, go further and claim that you use predictive algorithms all the time, probably better than machines do it. So my example comes from cooking for my family. So a predictive algorithm literally just uses historical information to look for patterns of success. So you have to have historical information, which could be in the form of a digital database with lots of data, lots of tweets, or lots of other kinds of data, or it could just be memories in your head. So I want you to think about memories in your head as historical data. And then you have to have a definition of success, which means you have to say, like, when was this successful? And it doesn't have to actually be a good thing to be successful, but you have to sort of optimize to some notion of success, because usually what you're doing is you're trying to attempt to measure the risk of something bad happening or the chances of something good happening. So we're just going to call it success, even though sometimes it's going to be bad. Like in the examples I'm going to show you guys, it's sometimes arrest, like the risk of arrest, but that'll be the notion of success. Anyway, so when I'm cooking dinner for my kids, like I want to talk about success as whether it was a successful dinner, right? And I want to say, like, what is a dinner I should cook so that it'll be successful? And I'm going to base that on a lot of memories I have of past dinners that were or were not successful. And so I'm going to be like, dinners like this were successful, dinners like that were not successful, right? It's what we all do every day. The reason I'm showing my son Wolfie with Nutella on his face is it's really critically important to realize that my notion of successful dinners, it might be different from my son's. So if I define success to be like my kids ate vegetables, that's not going to be the same definition of success as Wolfie would have it, right? His definition of success for dinner would be that he got to eat Nutella, which is in fact his definition of success. So to be clear, that's really important, because the dinners I end up making based on my definition of success, which is vegetables, are very, very different than the dinners I would make if I had taken on his definition. So it's just really important to realize that, like, depending on who is in charge, of course, the person in power is the one who decides how to build the algorithm. The person in power gets to define success, and the definition of success really does most of the work. The other work is done by the data itself, and the data itself could be problematic, which it is in the criminal justice system. And we'll talk about that as well. But I just want you to understand what an algorithm is doing is it's looking for patterns in the past, and it's going to guess that whatever happened in the past will happen in the future. So fundamentally, it is sort of assuming that the future will happen exactly as the past happened. And that's another really important fact for you to know about AI, is that it doesn't like reinvent morals or patterns or practices or biases. It just codifies such things. in my book, Weapons of Math Destruction, I think about particular types of algorithms that are widespread, mysterious, and destructive. I call them WMDs, or weapons of math destruction. And I have some examples in my book. Again, I'm not going to dwell on these because I know we have a lot to go through and we only have half an hour. But I will just mention that in the world of advertising, a Capital One website, and this is not unique, many credit card websites are going to be like this. They will suss you out when you arrive at the website, and they will show you the website that they think you deserve, complete with advertisements for the credit cards they think you deserve, which is to say that they basically assign you a credit score. It's not an official FICO score, but I call it an e-score. It's sort of an unofficial ad hoc score that depends on the cookies that live on your sort of digital footprint. So they sort of profile you, and like, people like you get credit cards like this, therefore we're going to show you these kinds of credit cards. I don't have to explain to you that what that really means is that our choices for credit cards, at the very least, are defined by what we see when we go to the website or when we search for credit cards on Google. And those choices are all going to be informed by the profiles that we land in. So really, we don't have much of a notion, that a sort of like a traditional notion of like being a sort of a savvy consumer who does a lot of research, because the truth is you can't actually do the research on credit cards online, because you're basically always being targeted by the exact credit card offers that they want to target you with. Similarly, when you think about who gets to see what ads, if you think about STEM jobs, there's evidence that men see more STEM jobs than women. If there's an advertisement for a STEM job, it's more likely to be seen by a man than a woman. This is kind of an ironic example. Women are actually worth more in terms of their eyeballs. So when there's auctions to show ads to consumers, they will pay more for women to see their ads, brand names like Coca-Cola or like some kind of, whatever consumer good. They'll pay more to show this ad to a woman than to a man, which means they will pay more in particular than the STEM career ad will pay. So women actually see more of them because they're worth more, and STEM ads probably do not pay as much in these auctions. So those are examples of like how ad tech, the algorithms that drive ad tech, like reduce and narrow our choices. Here's a couple of examples in the world of hiring. This is Kyle Beam. He was given a personality test in order to get a job, and he failed to get the job. He was lucky, even though he was unlucky because he didn't get the job. He was lucky for a couple other reasons, though. First of all, he recognized some of the questions as 5-factor model questions, which he had been given in a mental health capacity when he was being treated for bipolar disorder. So he recognized a mental health assessment embedded in a personality test, which, okay. And then he talked to his dad about it. His dad is actually a lawyer, so he's lucky there too, because he was, applying for a minimum wage job, and most such people do not have access to a good lawyer, as you guys know. But his dad was like, what kind of questions were on the test? And he explained it. And his dad was like, wait, that's not legal under the Americans with Disability Act, which I'm sure you guys know more than I do. But the point is that they had sort of intentionally embedded this mental health assessment as part of the hiring process, which is illegal. So that's still in the courts, by the way. I should say that his dad filed class action lawsuits on behalf of anybody who'd ever taken that test after making Kyle apply to 6 other jobs. So he actually filed 7 lawsuits. Amazon.com is a great example of sort of the unintended consequences of building an algorithm naively. So what happened there was they wanted to hire engineers at Amazon, and they wanted to like use their own data to decide which people to hire. This is a lot like the example I had with cooking dinner. Oh, like who has ever applied to Amazon to become an engineer, and like who were successful, quote unquote. And so that leads to the question, what does success look like? You know, and I don't actually know how Amazon did it, but my best guess is that Amazon said people are successful if they stay for more than 2 years, if they get promoted, and if they get raises. And those are all things that you can measure easily, right? But they are also all things that have a lot of bias against women, and of course against people of color. So what happened was, when they pattern matched, when they trained their algorithm based on their own data and their own information of like who was successful at Amazon in engineering, they built an algorithm that when they tested it on women, they realized it was a sexist algorithm. In particular, they realized that if women's resumes included the name of a women's college, like Barnard College, where I used to be a professor, that would give them negative points. Or if their resume mentioned that they'd been on the like women's lacrosse team, that would give them negative points. So they realized they had a sexist algorithm on their hands, and they did not use it, which is, I guess, good, although it makes you wonder what they did do, because that again was the sort of like automated version of their human hiring process. So like maybe they should fix their human hiring process. I want to talk about policing, and again, I just want to put it in the same exact framework, because all predictive algorithms are like this. In this case, we're not predicting people, we're predicting sort of arrests in neighborhoods. So this is also called hotspot policing or predictive policing. Basically what it does is it looks at where have a lot of arrests occurred. And it sends police to those neighborhoods to look for crime. And I'm trying to use my words carefully, because I want to make it clear that it's not actually saying where has crime occurred, because we don't track crime with data. We track arrests, which is really different. And so it's like the question is, where have we seen a lot of arrests? We send police there, and guess what? They arrest more people. Just to be clear, the difference between arrests, and you probably know this, the difference between arrests and crime is vast. There's a lot of missing crime data out there. Most people who commit crimes do not get arrested for it. But in this one case of marijuana use, we actually have some ground truth that white people and Black people smoke similar rates, but Black people get arrested much more often, like a 3 to 4 to 1, or sometimes 5 to 1 ratio of arrests. And this is old data, but I don't think it's changed that much. So the point I'm trying to make here is, when we use arrest data as a proxy for crimes, it's not only missing a lot of information, but it's missing it in different proportions for different kinds of people. In particular, for richer, whiter areas, it's the crime is almost entirely missing. The crime data is almost entirely missing, whereas for poorer, darker, like Blacker neighborhoods, it's going to be less missing. And the result is, of course, that this sort of feeds into this notion of having a so-called scientific approach to policing that ends up just repeating the broken window policies that we hear politicians say they're done with. I hope we have time for a couple questions at the end. I want to make sure that I'm making sense in what I'm saying. So the downstream from the predictive policing, of course, is what are the algorithms being used in the courts? And there are a bunch of different varieties of these called these recidivism risk algorithms. And some of them are questionnaire based, like this LSIR one that I'm about to talk about, which is to say you get a bunch of questions and they're each worth some points, and you add up the points and then you figure out what your full score is. These are sometimes used not solely by judges, but in part by judges, along with other considerations, to decide whether people should be incarcerated pre-trial, whether they should be given parole, or whether they should be given how long they should be sentenced. And to be clear, the way they're interpreted, because they're called crime risk assessments, they're interpreted as if people have a high score, they're more likely to reoffend. That's another way of talking about it. And I just want to dwell on that phrase a little bit, because what I was just saying before was that we don't actually have crime data. We only have arrest data, and there's a real problem with that. So when you hear someone say like the chance of reoffense or the crime risk, I want you to really think through that and interpret it as it's really the chance of being rearrested. Because actually, when you look at the algorithm to see what the definition of success is, it is not predicting crime, it is predicting arrest. And that's really different, as we know, because we know that some people get arrested when other people don't get arrested. So to be clear, so that's true, by the way, for all crime risk scores, all recidivism risk scores. They're all based on future arrests, as far as I know. Maybe some of them are particular to certain types of arrests. So I know there's like arrests for sexual crimes. There's certain types of crime risk scores that are specific types of arrests. But I just want to just dwell on the fact that that is different from actually saying the chance of someone committing a crime, because most likely, if they do commit a crime, it doesn't lead to an arrest. So then I goes to the and a final thing. I'm sure you know this, but like if you have a high risk score, you're more likely to be sentenced longer. You're less likely to be given a chance to go home before your trial, and you're less likely to get parole. So you're basically pre-punished for the offense that they claim that you're going to, that the defendant is going to do. Now I want to talk about how the most common recidivism risk score actually works. I should say that it was trained on a bunch of information that is very, very old. It probably hasn't been retrained in decades, which is really already a problem. It doesn't change with the times. But here are the categories that the questions come to. They are about your arrest record and conviction record. Already a very biased look at whether you are actually criminal, because again, most crimes do not lead to an arrest. Then it's basically a proxy for poverty. Whether you've been educated, when you finish high school, did you get suspended? That's also a proxy for race. Are you on welfare? This number 26 doesn't seem constitutional to me. You guys are the experts. Did your father go to prison? If your father went to prison, then your score goes up. Other questions are, do you come from a high crime neighborhood, which is a proxy, of course, for poverty and race? It's like, are you near a broken windows policing situation? Do you have gang friends? So that's in the companions thing. Of course, that is, again, very related to this notion of like, who do you hang out with? Are your friends in this neighborhood that we police? And then, of course, there's the criminalization of addiction and the criminalization of mental health problems in the next two sections. And then finally, the Orwellian question: do you think that the system is rigged against you? And if you say yes, then it is. So I hasten to add that this is not the only example of crime risk scores. Sometimes crime risk scores, and for that matter, predictive policing, do not have questionnaires around them. Sometimes they have really fancy math. I get into fights with mathematicians, because I am a mathematician, about like claiming that you're doing something really sophisticated around this notion of either predictive policing or crime risk scores, because at the end of the day, what you're really doing is predicting not crime, but you're predicting police, because you're predicting police arresting people, which is at the end of the day an action of the police. And if you think about it that way, the last word I'll say about this, if you think about these things as predicting police, they're actually pretty good. In the sense that, like, if you look at hotspot policing and you're like, oh, these are what the places where the police are going to go arrest people. Yeah, that is where the police are going to go arrest people. Similarly, if you think about recidivism risk scores as like, we predict these are the people that will be profiled by the police and arrested by the police. Yes, it is predictable that people that have untreated addiction problems will be arrested in the future. That people who are poor will be arrested in the future. The people that have untreated mental health problems will be arrested in the future. Those are all true things. If you remove those predictable things like mental health problem, poverty, race, and addiction, then it's really, really hard to predict crime. I just want to say, like, I've talked at the very technical level about why do we have these like ridiculous sort of factors in these algorithms, and the answer is because they become much more predictable that way. If we simply tried to predict rape, assault, or car theft, or other kinds of harm to property, it would be so much harder to do. And they're like, not the people who like to say that their algorithms are highly predictive would not have a job anymore, because they're not very good at predicting those things. They are good at predicting police, that police are going to continue to profile such people that we just described. There are a few more examples I wanted to get to if I could. The algorithms that rule social media, like Facebook, like what is the algorithm optimizing to? What is the definition of success for Facebook? And the answer is keeping us on Facebook. It is not, it's kind of a great example of how, like, with my dinner example, like I wanted my kids to eat vegetables, but they want to eat Nutella. Like with Facebook, like we might want connections, and we might want to know how our friends are doing, and we might want to know important stories of the day. But Facebook wants to give us the things that'll get us in fights, and the things that'll keep us on Facebook in endless fights. So we're not getting what we want. We're getting what they want us to get. Another example of an algorithm that you should know about for a different reason is the Apple Card algorithm. So there was this pretty famous viral tweet by an engineer that he and his wife both applied to the Apple Card, and they both got Apple Cards, but he got 10 times as much credit line as his wife, and he like accused the Apple Card of having a sexist algorithm. It turned out like the New York State Department of Financial Services did this whole investigation and found that they did not have a sexist algorithm, but it was like too late for Apple Card to have a good answer. So that's sort of like an example I give in my work as an algorithmic auditor to companies when I'm trying to convince them to be ready for that accusation of having a problematic algorithm. Optum is an example of an algorithm in healthcare, which was to help people out who had complex medical problems, and to give them sort of a helper, sort of give them a concierge service, if you will, somebody who can help them navigate the healthcare system. So Optum is a health insurance company. They don't want to pay for unnecessary treatment. They certainly don't want to see that one of their patients is getting conflicting treatment that's going to be both expensive and a problem for their health. So their idea was like, let's pair people with really complex medical problems with these helpers, and then everybody wins because they have better healthcare and it costs less. The problem is that they optimized to the wrong definition of success. I keep on dwelling on this, but it's a huge problem. They optimized not to people who had complex medical problems, but historically to people that were really expensive. And of course, there is a relationship. That's kind of what I just mentioned. There's a relationship between complex medical problems and expensive patients, but it's not a one-to-one relationship in the sense that there are lots of people that have complex medical problems but didn't get treated for them. So they were sort of undertreated. In particular, African-American patients historically in the healthcare system were not treated well. So what that ended up doing was it codified that exact practice, that if a Black patient had lots of medical problems, we're just going to ignore them. And that's what it did. So it's a great example of how past practices get pushed into the future, get propagated into the future with algorithms. Oops, I should have gone through these, I guess. The final thing I wanted to mention is a couple examples of things you should go look at, but also my notion of like what we should do better. Right now, these algorithms are like policy, as far as I'm concerned. They affect people in deep ways, in really important ways, and they are not vetted before they're deployed. So Facebook doesn't have to talk to anyone about the kinds of harms that could happen from their Facebook, from the TikTok algorithm, or to Rohingya in Myanmar. Even though these can actually have a lot of effect and a lot of deadly effect. So my goal is to get out sort of very important algorithms to have the same burden of safety and efficacy that we have with drugs. So like the FDA forces a drug company to show that their new drug is both safe and effective. I think we should do the same for algorithms, and we should in particular we should put the burden on the companies that are going to benefit, that are going to profit from using their algorithms before they're allowed to deploy them. We're going to put the burden on them to show that these algorithms work well. And right now we have no such burden whatsoever. Basically, it's kind of akin to the idea that like the people who get sick from a bad drug have to make the case that they got sick from the bad drug, rather than the drug company saying we did a test and this drug is safe. Couple books you guys should read, written by Meredith Broussard and Sophia Noble, as well as Ruha Benjamin. And then finally, there's a movie called Coded Bias with that I'm actually in, but it's really starring Joy Buolamwini, who with a couple of their folks audited the facial recognition software and found that it worked a lot better for white men than for Black women. And I'll stop there. I don't know exactly how much time I used, but if I have any more minutes, I could answer questions. Thank you.